Hey everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day, and we are back here in Lancaster at the wonderful Water Street Bindery, where I am about to go in and see Tony Haverstick, who has been the proprietor of this institution for decades. We've been here once before, but today is something of a bittersweet day because Tony has sold the building and is retiring from the bookbinding trade. But he has, over the years, not only bound hundreds of wonderful books for clients all over the world, but he's amassed an amazing collection of books on bookbinding, some of which I am lucky enough to be purchasing today. And we're going to show you those books in just a second. But Tony, you have two very special books, which I know you're keeping, which I had never seen before, which I think our audience would be really interested in seeing. And these are the two earliest books on bookbinding, one published in England and one published in the United States. Could you show them to us? Let's start with the book that was published in England.
Yeah, sure, Eric. I was buying my bookbinding collection, but in this shop, the bookbinding collection was a kind of a practical collection, so it was a lot of workbooks.
Yeah.
But I had in that collection, which I pulled out for myself, two really kind of nice books. The earliest English books on the bookbinding craft, one from America and one from England. The England one is the English manual is the earliest. It's in a protective case made to look like a leather binding. We did that here at the shop too, actually, every once in a while. Oh, I could tell that story. And here's the actual book itself. It's the Oswestry manual, and itself has been rebound. Or it was fancily bound. It's an 1811 production, but this binding, it was already famous, and so it got a pretty nice binding here, I would say somewhere around, I don't know, 1890 or something. So it originally was probably in paper.
And it was published anonymously, right?
Yeah, actually.
Which is pretty interesting. Here's the title page. 1811, the first book ever on the art of bookbinding. And you were telling me it was something of a trade secret bookbinding. So we don't have earlier books on bookbinding in part because the secrets were kept among the masters. But that book basically gave some of those secrets away. Now that was published about 40 years before any American bookbinding work was published.
Yeah, and this is down in Philadelphia, and if this anybody who's local around here interested in books, it's our earliest book on bookbinding in 36 or something.
1856. A manual of the art of bookbinding. And one of the interesting things about this book is that it produces, among other things, interesting samples of, look at that, marbleized paper from the time.
Which, was beginning to be available from the United States and not just from England. So this in itself is makes this book an interesting thing. It's offsetting. You'll have to do something. Oh, no, you don't have to do something. Right. This is still mine.
That's really, really great. Yeah. Now, you are still binding books, but you are on your final book. And this book here, I know is going to be the final book that you're going to bind here at the bindery. It has boards and it has the spine ready to go. What are you going to do with it?
Well, the only books I really have for myself, well, not the only books, but most of them I really have for myself are books that I've bound for bookbinding, you may say from scratch. Like you get the individual sections, if you know what I'm talking about, or let's say pages for those who don't, and sew them together into a book, and then make a leather or a vellum cover for the book. And this is a kind of I'm gonna make it easy on myself because I don't have a lot of time. I'm gonna make this vellum so I won't have to decorate the spine. So,
and I know over here you have some other books of yours.
Exactly, and this is the collection of books I've done over my life that. When I can get a book on bookbinding, if I can get it in sheets, as we say, I do get it in sheets, and some of them are actually finely printed, so they're only available and blah blah blah. But these are my own bunch of the ones I'll be keeping for myself that I made for myself.
We're going to go back, Tony, and look at the bookbinding collection now. This will be my final walk through your store. Why don't I follow you? You lead. I'm glad you were able to sell the building. It's a sort of bittersweet day, as we know that.
Well, it makes it a little less bittersweet, Eric. A little less bitter, anyway.
Yeah.
And part of it, in time. In some ways, it was trying to go. But the person who bought this shop, which is a historical
Yeah.
structure in Lancaster, and was owned by a bookbinder, as it happens in the 1800s. The person who's buying this, it's a downtown structure.
Yeah.
One always it worries, but it's doing a wonderful job with the restoration of it.
That's great. It's going to be back to its former glory here. We're on Water Street. Hey, there's an article here, an early article from the 90s about Fritz Eberhard. Who was he?
Well, that's kind of interesting. Who was Fritz Eberhard?
Yeah.
One of the things that Eric's getting in this stack of books is, I mentioned before, between the casing and a binding. This is a casing. You can see how Fritz Eberhard was a German binder, and he was a big influence on me back in, I guess it was the 70s. And he's famous for his art binding, and that's a total different subject. But this is just a case that he made, a leather, a cloth cover for actually a very nicely printed book on the history of bookbinding.
Yeah.
It was kind of modern bookbinding.
Yeah.
But this is a kind of a good edition of a very.
What did Fritz
well-known
teach
book.
you about bookbinding? Everything, or what did you learn?
Well, I wouldn't say I learned techniques from Fritz specifically. Fritz was pretty set in his ways about doing things. That's probably why he's world famous. But a certain kind of carefulness and an appreciation for getting things right and things like the sewing and the pairing. He was very neat in his work, neater than a lot of people are. You know what I'd say about Fritz? A respect for the work, actually. Yeah.
Well, Tony, we're going to wrap up, but I want you to show us one book off this table which you've used. This is a working binder's library. Show us one book that really sort of stands out to you. Should we look at this one? This is a pretty book.
I have to say,
bookbinding stuff.
this is very good because I did so much historical restoration.
Yeah.
And it's a very good and relatively recent. I mean, like 20 years ago. We didn't have these when I first began. When I began this, all the bookbinding books were about the King's bindings and heavy gilt stuff. Lately, in the democratization of things, we have a lot more books about the ordinary that people would have happened. So when I have an old book to fix, to make a period style binding, you know, if I'm puzzled, I go to something like this to look for a design.
Yeah.
This is a good book.
Thanks.
That and the actual manual.
Thanks, Tony. Well, I'm going to turn the camera around to me and say that all these amazing bookbinding books are coming to Midtown Scholar. We hope you'll come check them out. Hey, everybody. We made it back to the sort room. You can see all the books that have been coming in fast and furious from the various book sales we've been to this past week. I just finished unpacking Tony's binding books, though, and I wanted to show you a couple that I hadn't just seen before that are come in handy here as we do Buy Day Fridays, this beautiful book on publishers' bookbinding, and also a book on booksellers' tickets, things we discussed on Buy Day Friday before, but it's really good to have these reference books. I'm keeping these, but the other hundreds of books will be on display at the Scholars soon. And I didn't want to leave you, even though this is a selfie edition of Buy Day Friday, without a funny book. This one just came in at the last book sale we went to. It goes with the theme of do-it-yourself. That's right, chainsaw carving for beginners. Something that maybe you didn't know there was a beginner's book. And you too can learn how to carve giant bunnies. What's amusing about this book is the only safety warning that comes with the book is be very careful on how much you lift in terms of logs. And that is Chainsaw Carving for Beginners. Thanks for watching Buy Day today and every Friday at noon. Keep watching for more adventures in the world of books.